Hello everyone, Lone Warfare. Welcome to the Week 2 episode of the Chaos Report for the Blight Challenge League. In this video, I'll be taking a quick look at our unique item watchlist. We'll also be taking another close look at the current meta, as well as taking an in-depth look at the newly buffed Blighted Maps, both from a commodity perspective in our currency section, as well as taking a deeper look at the yellow tier Blighted Maps in specific in our strategy section. As always, do keep in mind that these are educated guesses or predictions, and as such they might not be entirely accurate. Furthermore, I might miss a thing or two that seem obvious to many, for that I apologize. It's hard to cover everything after all. If I do miss something you think is important, leave it in the comments down below. What that means, of course, is invest at your own risk, as always. And with that disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right in. As per usual, for our first segment, we'll be taking a look at the currencies that are currently important to keep an eye on. Of course, we have to talk about Exalted Orbs first. Nothing in Path of Exile's softcore leagues works without these puppies. As mentioned last week, Exalted Orbs have seen the most drastic rise of prices this early in the league to date. That rise has continued further in this past week, reaching an absolutely ridiculous price point of about 175 chaos each. Thanks to a lot of your comments on YouTube, Reddit, and my Discord, the whole pricing for these makes a bit more sense now. The reason for these prices is primarily due to a continued use of the multi-modding for specifically Necromancer items that make use of the plus gem level or plus maximum number of summoned monster mods. Simply rolling one of these on a wand, chest piece, or staff, and then transitioning into a multi-mod seems to have been a more popular way to craft this league than I originally anticipated. It is impossible to tell when Exalted Orb prices will finally come to a halt or even drop, as they don't seem to lose any steam, no matter the circumstances. Even after the Blighted Maps patch, which drastically increased the amount of currency that drops from Blighted Maps as well, we have seen no real impact on Exalt prices as a direct result. Furthermore, Exalted Orb Divination cards have now become the primary choice for farming on maps. I, myself, have also moved over to my T16 Elder setup from Lair to Precinct, and have had great success doing that so far. I would definitely recommend either a Shaped Arcade strat or an Elder Precinct strat, for all of those who are able to properly run such strats. But of course we'll cover this more in depth in the Atlas strategy part. Similarly as well to last week, I'll be ending this part of the Exalted Orb price analysis by imploring you to check the Exalt prices regularly yourself during the next week, as the prices seem extremely volatile with no real way to predict it going one way or another. Exactly as predicted, the Alteration Orbs have continued their rise to now roughly 7 Ords per Chaos level. Similarly to the Exalted Orbs, these bad boys have seen their highest price ever in the Legion League, and as a result have seen a lot of attention from players that might have never used them before. This was due to the overuse of the Alt plus Regal crafting method, which has been vastly popularized by streamers and content creators alike. This method, as previously stated in the Exalted Orb section, has continued to be a large staple of the crafting meta this league. And as a result, alterations have continued to rise and are also projected to rise further. I wouldn't be surprised to see them return to a 5-to-1 alt to chaos ratio, which we also had in Legion League, as more players are aware of this method of crafting than ever before, in addition to the Blight League mechanic dropping a substantially fewer quantity of low-level currencies such as Alteration Orbs than Legion did. This will likely lead to a demand surplus, thus raising the prices further. Additionally, with more people switching away from the first or second build to further ones, there is also going to be an additional increase in the alteration usage to craft items for the new characters. Alteration Orbs are thusly about to reach a level where unlocking your filter's tier 2 jewelry drops might become worthwhile again, as they don't take up much space to pick up, and can grant you an additional 1 or 2 chaos per map soon. As a result, keep that option in mind when Alteration Orbs reach the 6 or 5-to-1 ratio. This will likely happen in the next week, so keep an eye on these prices and update your filter accordingly. Ancient Orbs have, since last week, seen a further increase in price, up to their current max of 37 chaos each. In the last few days, however, they've already started to drop as predicted. The reason for the insanely high prices, of course, is that the Nemesis Zana mod is back and people are trying to chance the Headhunter belts. As stated last week as well, this gets counteracted by the Headhunter prices themselves, which are currently falling, as well as the Harbinger Zana mod, which pumps more Ancient Orbs into the economy. It is very likely that Ancient Orbs will continue this rise in full game for a while, correlating to the Headhunter prices themselves, which are also fluctuating quite a bit this early in the league. They expected to stick around the 25 to 40 chaos range for a while, but that will all depend on the popularity of the Headhunter, as that's pretty much the only thing Ancient Orbs are used for nowadays anyway, We'll see how they continue to behave next week, and we'll consider if this slot in the currency section is necessary, or if they're just going to continue their fluctuations throughout the rest of the league. Expect to have some high volume and low prices days, as well as some low volume and high price days, depending on how many people are running Harbingers at the time and listing their orbs, as well as how many people are still chancing their Headhunters, depending on the price of it. Having reached the new Blighted Maps area of the Chaos Report already, let's take a quick look at how the 3.8.1 patch has affected pricing for these. We'll be going over more Blighted Maps related discussion later in the video as well, after the Atlas analysis, where we usually have our overall discussion and strategy part. We'll be taking a more critical look at the overall worth of the Blighted Maps in the current environment of the game. The 3.8.1 patch has drastically increased the loot that Blighted Maps provide, and equally as drastic, reduced the challenge that they embodied as well. As a result, we've seen an absolute explosion in terms of prices, correlating to the added loot they grant. I hope you took my advice to heart last week when I recommended stocking them up before the patch, as the new prices are often more than 2 to 3 times as high. Last week's cheapest map was denoted at around 12 chaos for a tier 1 map. This week, we see that the majority of white maps have gathered around the 22 chaos area, signaling a price increase of about 80%. Similarly to last week, this also means that blight encounters inside of your maps have just gained a gigantic bump in worth. Every single time you run a blight encounter, you have the chance to gain a blighted map, and as a result, at the very least, 22 chaos. The more expensive yellow maps have placed themselves at around 29 to 39 chaos, depending on the base map. The most expensive blighted maps are the tier 15 red maps, for obvious reasons, which have all found themselves at about 100 chaos each. Aside from Tower, which hits at a solid 150 chaos due to its superior position on the Atlas and Divination card drops. I'm not entirely sure if blighted maps are affected by Atlas position or the usual div card drops, but it seems that way, based on the overall pricing for each map. If anybody knows more specifics, please hit me up. For farming, it is currently extremely worthwhile to run higher tier maps, as they are weighted towards having more tendrils in each blight encounter, thusly increasing your chance to gain a blighted chest, and as a direct result, increasing your chance for blighted map drops. Furthermore, running high level maps will also give you the chance to drop the higher priced red tier blighted maps, which you cannot drop for obvious reasons in lower tier maps. As such, I would recommend trying to run the highest maps that you can possibly run, if you're intent on farming blighted maps in the following week for a profit. The most worthwhile blighted maps to run at the moment seem to be the yellow maps, as their loot increase comparatively to the white ones seem to be worth the up price. Red maps, however, do not seem worth it if you're intending to buy and run them, based on my limited testing so far. We'll be going into a bit more depth with that cost to loot analysis in the strategy section of this video, so please stay tuned for that. As an overall note from me, personally, I am fairly unhappy with the changes to the blighted maps in terms of their decreased challenge. While it is nice that they are now running a lot better, I definitely do miss the frantic feeling they had before, that really made you sweat quite often due to the sheer amount of overwhelming enemies that would crash down upon you and your little pump. I'm hoping that GGG will slowly tune the blighted maps back towards being a more frantic or in other ways difficult encounter, so players are forced to really adjust their builds towards farming them properly. The reward increase overall is very welcome, however, as they really did not seem worthy of an endgame system, considering the amount of time spent in each map, comparatively to the reward before the patch. Also, of course, welcome is the performance. Some would even argue that despite the patch, they are still not worth the time, but as I mentioned earlier, we'll take a look at that later on in the video. With those currencies and the beginnings of the blighted maps covered, let's move on to our unique item watch list and take a quick look at the items that we are looking at. It currently consists of 5 unique items, however, we'll be keeping this number of items for now to make some room for more discussions around blighted maps later on in the video. This video is going to be incredibly long. Please let me know in the comments down below if you'd like me to keep the unique item watch list this short or if you'd prefer a longer watch list instead, similar to how we used to have them in the Legion Chaos reports. If you are new to this series, please refer to the Legion episodes for a comparison. They also feature some still relevant information regarding farming strategies on the Atlas. So it's not a complete waste of time for you either. First up, as always, the 2 jewels we've loved since Legion, the Tempered Flesh and Transcendent Flesh. Since last week, we've seen the Transcendent Flesh have some tumultuous days, falling rapidly in prices from one day to the next, then rising again just as rapidly. It has mostly stayed around the 80 chaos price point from last league. However, it's projected to drop again in the next day or two, likely in preparation to rise in the future. It is still a very solid choice for everyone that paths around the duelist or marauder area, and is definitely recommended if you can fit it into your crit-based build in any possible way. As always with these two jewels, keep in mind that you can create your own Transcendent Flash with a Vial of Transcendence, a Tempered Flash, as well as a tier 3 Sacrifice Room in Alva's Temple. At the moment of writing this part, it will run you about 10 chaos total, netting you a 70 chaos profit if you intend on selling the resulting Transcendent Flash. They're likely to retain their current pricing, fluctuations included of course. As such, I would argue that these jewels don't necessarily deserve a spot on the watchlist anymore, but we'll keep another look at them next week, just to make sure. If they continue to stay at the current fluctuating price point, we'll replace it with one of our other choices mentioned last week. Moving on to our favorite flask in the entire game, as well as the most expensive one ever released, the Bottled Faith. We've predicted this one would fall last week, however, instead we've seen an absolutely insane price hike for this one. It has reached a top price of over 27 Exiles on Saturday, however it has already started falling rapidly, as we predicted last week. Not entirely sure what happened from Tuesday to Saturday cause this insane price rise, but it seems that it's over now and the Bottled Faith is returning to its projected course from last week. Of course, pricing is likely influenced by the vast amount of use cases for this flask, representing a best-in-slot option for nearly all crit-based builds in the game. As a result, this flask will retain a very, very high price throughout this entire league, as it's also the hardest flask to acquire yourself. As a quick reminder on how to acquire one, in case you weren't aware, it can only be dropped through the Cortex encounter from Synthesis League, which can only be obtained through a red map Zana mission. I'm not entirely sure if you are required a certain tier inside the red maps, however, similar to Farol with Einhar, which requires at least a tier 13 map to spawn the Portal Beast. As a result, I would recommend making sure to run your Zana missions at the highest level possible, just in case the Cortex encounter has a minimum requirement similar to the previously mentioned one from Einhar. The insane pricing of this one might also explain the unusually high prices for the Zana Master Prophecy, which has reached Nico levels of cost at around 5 to 6 chaos each. To wrap this one up, all I have to say is that I'm happy that this flask is back in the game, as it's one of my personal favorites, and that I'll likely to try acquire one myself in this league. The flask will, as mentioned earlier, likely retain a large portion of the value, and I don't see it dipping below like somewhere around 9x anywhere soon. Probably not in the entire league. Following that, let's take a look at how the Primordial Jewels are doing. As predicted, they are still widely popular, however dropping in price since last week, especially the Primordial Might Jewel. On the other hand, both the Primordial Harmony as well as the Primordial Eminence have seen a drastic increase in price. The Primordial Harmony's increase can be attributed to the increase in price of the Anima Stone, which is a combination of all three Primordial Jewels, which has recently seen a large surge in popularity due to a popular streamer making an Elementalist build using it. You know which one I'm talking about. For farming strategies, please check last week's episode or the prediction episode, as they both cover ways to farm these jewels specifically, and I will not be reiterating them here. The jewels will likely retain a fair bit of their value for the next week, as the previously mentioned build has just finished recently, and as such will be tried out by a lot of players, driving up demand. As an overall projection, however, I would imagine that both the Anima Stone as well as the correlating Primordial Jewels will continue the previous price drop as predicted. Additionally, as Golomancer builds are usually more of a starter choice than a transitional one, the jewels will likely not be in high demand afterwards. That said, the streamer also announced that he'll be trying out a Golomancer build in a not so distant future. So just keep an eye on these jewels and buy them at a time when they're not influenced by popular trends. Next up, and lastly, the Devouring Diadem. As predicted last week, the Devouring Diadem has continued its price dump over this past week as well, and has now reached a roughly 45 chaos price point. The helmet is still extremely relevant to a lot of different builds, however, as people realize that the mana changes were not as drastic as originally anticipated, many players have opted to choose other ways to sustain mana than the Devouring Diadem. With a roughly 5% usage rate at the current moment, it is still very popular. However, the supply vastly outnumbers the demand here. With the reworked Mastermind reward structure, more players than ever before have been farming or running the Mastermind, and as such, the supply for this one is also higher than ever. In previous leagues such as Legion, This helmet bottomed out at roughly 55 chaos base price point for the majority of the league. As a result, I would expect the diadem to reach its low point in the coming week, and it will likely remain there for the rest of the league, barring any unforeseen circumstances, such as streamer builds or other such factors. If that is indeed the case, I'll be updating you on that and removing the diadem from the watchlist next week. Now, moving on to our third segment for this video, the good old meta analysis. Comparatively to last week, there have been very little meta changes overall. The Necromancer has seen a 1% increase, likely due to more people recommending these builds for newer player, as a result of their accessibility and ease of use. Furthermore, the Assassin has seen a 1% dip, very likely caused by many players switching off of poison builds as they realize it's not quite what they were expecting. For the future of the meta, I'll stand by my predictions from last week that we're likely to see a dip in the summoner-related ascendancies, as more players will be opting for their usual playstyles, rather than continue on with the summoners. That said, we're also likely to see a further dip in the assassin ascendancy, as many players have already stopped playing with poison-type builds. You can see a similar decline in the corroded fossil prices for Delve, which usually represent a direct correlation to how many players are using poison or bleed-related builds, as they're the main way to craft weapons or armor for them. As a result, you would see higher corroded prices while and before players opt into that kind of a build, which is not the case at the current time, as they are losing value rapidly. For crafting, continue to focus on the summoners, as they are clearly representing the majority of the player base at the moment, thus making your pool of potential customers the largest. As for the Atlas analysis, most of what I recommended last 2 weeks is still holding true. However, there are some small changes to my recommendations. For T16 Elder farming, I would recommend Precinct in place of Lair, even for Divination card farming, or rather, specifically because of it. As such, the recommended T16 Elder setups are Tower and Precinct respectively. Tower still has the added benefit of dropping both Vermilion as well as Bone Helmet bases, making it the potentially superior choice for overall T16 farming, if all you're looking for is the highest possible amount of currency that can be gained per map. However, Precinct has been my target of choice, due to the high drop rate of Saint's Treasure Divination cards, providing me with an ample supply of Exalted Orbs since I've started farming these maps a few days ago. Precinct also features a rather unique assortment of bosses, which work fantastically with specific Sexton mods such as the Harbinger. There's no real winner between the two, in my personal opinion, and I would recommend deciding for yourself which map you should run. Aside from these two, there are still an absolute ton of worthwhile maps to run this league, both in a shaped as well as an Elder strat, as the league mechanic is not as map restricting as the Legion mechanic was, for example. As for bases to look out for during your own deliberations, I would recommend taking a look at the maps that drop the Vermilion Ring base as well as the Bone Helmets. These are the most expensive Elder or Shaper bases in the game at the moment, or in case of the Vermilion Ring, the most popular ones, which are restricted to specific parts of the Atlas and can both drop in the same map, and as a result, these maps should prove to be fairly worthwhile to run. Following that, feel free to do your own research and decide on what map you like best. Now, with the Atlas analysis finished, let's dive right into the Blighted map discussion that all of you are here for, most likely. I'll be referencing a lot of my own personal testing, as well as Grimrow's first iteration of testing Blighted maps in the Yellow tier. I'll be posting a link to the video in question in the description as well, so make sure to head on over and hear it from the master himself as well. His data is extremely worthwhile as it represents a larger sample size to work with than simply my own. As previously mentioned, Yellow maps seem to be the most valuable ones from my own personal testing, if you intend on buying them all from other players. Inside of the Yellow maps, there didn't seem too much of a difference between running a tier 6 and a tier 10 map from what I can tell, ignoring the eye level of the dropped items of course. However, as I don't have a lot of data, as a singular person, please correct me if you have a larger sample size to present that might clear things up. As for the overall profit margin, Grimrow has presented a very detailed spreadsheet detailing his 30 runs of Blighted Yellow maps, 15 of them with amber oils and 15 of them with teal oils to compare the two oils against each other. While we're not going to deep dive into the oil situation in this video, the overall drops themselves and the profit margins he recorded will be very useful to our discussion indeed. If you are interested in his findings regarding the oils, which I absolutely recommend as they're fascinating and the videos are very well produced, make sure to check out his video, as well as the upcoming one featuring red maps, which again, you can find the links to in the description down below. The overall profit margins that Grimrow recorded show a roughly 27.5 profit per map over 15 amber oiled maps, the overall profit margin for 15 teal oiled maps was about 56 chaos. These prices assume that the 30 maps he bought were all bought for 30 chaos, which is similar to the current prices, and that the teal oils were bought for a total of 90 chaos, which is a bit cheaper than the 135 chaos it would cost at current prices. Each of the Blighted maps takes about 6 to 7 minutes to run, and as a result you'll be running at best about 10 of them per hour if you're being efficient. This means that the overall profit margin for the yellow maps, adjusted to the current prices, is somewhere between 3 to 7 chaos a minute, or about 180 to 400 chaos an hour, depending on whether or not you're properly investing in them using the anointable oil system. This data also coincides with my own limited testing, as I've recorded a similar amount of profit in my 10 yellow maps while using only sepia oils, which, just like the ember oils that Grimrow used, provide a mere 15% pack size increase for the maps. There has been zero data to suggest that mass running these maps at a price point of about 30 chaos will lose you money, neither in Grimrow's data nor in my own. The general base loot level seems to support a 30 chaos price point for the yellow maps themselves, as they are bound to pay out more than those 30 chaos over a large enough sample size. However, do keep in mind that you are spending a decent chunk of time in each one of these maps, and as such, you need to make the mental calculations, whether you can make more chaos elsewhere, as many builds are easily able to do that in specific setups. Another thing to consider for this farming is that many builds are able to do this easily after the 3.8.1 changes. The Blighted map encounters are very easy compared to before the patch, and they do not scale with power level of your character whatsoever. As a result, as long as you can manage to beat the Blighted maps, you'll be making as much money as somebody wearing a headhunter and being supported by an aura bot. This represents a very nice opportunity for players that might not know exactly how to properly turn a profit in the normal Atlas or an Elder Shaper setup. As a result, the prices for the Blighted maps, specifically the yellow tiers, might increase in the future. Closing out this short discussion on Blighted maps, which of course will continue in the next few episodes most likely, I would recommend players to run their own yellow maps, as long as their prices are around 30 chaos. I would, however, recommend holding onto the red Blighted maps before we get any clear statistics on them. If you're not likely to be able to get at least 10 red tier Blighted maps before you attempt to run them, I would recommend selling them, as you will not be able to sustain a bad RNG streak with only 3 or 4 sample size of maps, or similar. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to collect a lot of data on the red maps, as they are extremely expensive at the current moment. Similarly, Grimrow has not released his findings on the red tiers either, so I cannot give you any further information on those using his data. From my limited testing, however, it felt, again, very limited sample size, so keep that in mind, that red tiers did not provide a big enough increase in terms of loot or item level to justify the nearly 3 times price they have compared to yellow maps, and thus, you're likely better off selling them than running them yourself, unless you have a huge amount of currency to invest to get a large enough sample size to make up bad RNG. If you want to provide statistics for me for analysis regarding the red maps that can be included in the next episode, because you're running them anyway, please feel free to join the Discord in the description down below and send me a private message with your findings and testing methodology. I'll be trying hard to provide some actual useful data in the next Chaos Report on the red tier Blighted maps. My sincerest apologies for not getting around to collecting enough useful data on those so far. Now, for the last little segment, some rapid-fire farming and/or crafting tips, as per usual. As always, delving is probably your best bet still. Since last week, corroded fossils have dropped in price quite drastically, as mentioned in the meta-analysis. As such, the Frozen Hollow area has returned to its old spot as being king of the depths. You'll be looking for breakable walls and their delicious fossil loot, specifically the serrated pristine and prismatic fossils. Not only do those provide the highest ratio of fossil to chaos, but the Frozen Hollow is also by far the easiest area to darkness delve in, as the walls are very close to the actual crawler's path and very hard to miss. Similarly to last week, you will also be looking secondarily for the Petrified Forest, as this is where you'll gain the majority of your bound and corroded fossils. Serrated fossils currently sell at 17 chaos plus. Bound fossils go for about 10 chaos each, and pristine have dipped slightly to about 9 chaos right now. Always remember to save up a few and sell in bulk, as you can easily ask for a 50% plus up price for a well-sized stack. I oftentimes sell my serrated fossils at 22 to 25 chaos each instead of the current 17. If you happen to end up with a T3 corruption room in Alva's Temple, consider buying the new Triad Grip unique gloves and throwing them in. They're extremely popular when you acquire the all-white sockets corruption, due to its unique chaos conversion effect. You will end up with a 1 in 4 chance to get this outcome, and the finished gloves sell for about 6 to 7 exalted orbs right now. Just make sure to actually get all 4 sockets first, using some jeweler orbs. I've seen a few people accidentally forget about that and ending up with less than 4 white sockets as a result. Oof. Spamming your potentially overabundant Asana missions, especially the red ones, can lead to an easy access to the synthesis boss fight, and thus some really good loot. These boss fights drop quite some valuable items, such as the Bottled Faith and many Herald-related rings, some of which can be worth multiple exalted orbs with the right combination of mods. Similarly, the actual synthesis maps themselves can net you a very decent amount of currency as well, as they will be spawned with specific synthesis modifiers on them. Things such as rare monsters drop 3 additional currency items or 25% chance for a rare monster to drop an elder item are very common. I would recommend running these at the highest map tier you can handle, as specifically the elder and shaper bases can be worth an absolute fortune, largely dependent on the eye level of course. Currently, it is unknown whether the Cortex boss fight has a minimum tier requirement, and as such, you should always attempt to run the highest tier of red map possible, just so you don't miss the possibility of getting it. Lastly, make sure to check your menagerie every once in a while for valuable beasts while running your Einhar missions. There's quite a few very expensive beasts that you can easily overlook while simply running your maps. To sell them, simply go to the menagerie itself and talk to Einhar. He will sell you the bestiary orb for 1 chaos each, that you then simply use on the desired beast in your bestiary. While running the Einhar missions themselves, always remember to try and be above the tier 13 threshold for red missions, as those are the only ones that can spawn every beast in the game, as the portal beast for Farol cannot be spawned on lower level maps than tier 13s. I'm not entirely sure if this applies to beasts other than the portal one for Farol, but better be safe than sorry. And with those last few tips wrapped up, I'll be ending this week's Chaos Report. I hope this video was informative and you learned something from it that you can apply to your own game. Please let me know if I missed anything or you'd have wanted me to talk about anything in specific that I might not have covered. Also, please give me feedback on the thing that I asked you about with the unique item watchlist. If you want to support the creation of these videos, feel free to check out my Patreon and maybe consider signing up for it. You can find a link to it in the description down below. Any and all support is highly appreciated. If you have any suggestions for Patreon rewards that you guys would like to see, please let me know in my Discord's feedback channel, down below this video in the comments or on my Twitter. I read all of your comments everywhere. You can find a link to my Twitter and Discord down below in the descriptions as well. Furthermore, let me know if you'd like to see me cover a particular topic regarding Path of Exile. I'm always willing to explore new video types or add any extra segments to this series. However, this video is already very long, so maybe not that one. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell thingamajig, like and dislike the video, and check me out over on twitch.tv/lunarwolf. You can find a link to my stream down below in the description as well. And with that, thanks for watching, and keep farming those exils.